All is well with the economy, and India is now at the pre-COVID levels. That's the upshot from the economic survey, hours ahead of the next union budget. I'm Barkha Dutt. Good evening. This is the Mojo Story. Let's take a look at our big developments on this story. Something that concerns us all is the state of the economy. The Finance Minister, presenting the economic survey before Parliament, has argued that all is well. The economic recovery has now taken India to the levels that existed before the COVID pandemic destabilized our lives. The growth rate is projected to be between 8 and 8.5% for the financial year 2022-2023, and in fact at 9.2% for this fiscal. Now, the question is that the optimism that is put forth by the economic survey, is that something that our experts agree on, or is the experienced lives of Indians through the third wave of the pandemic and counting something that is very different? The survey acknowledges that the services sector in particular had been worst hit, and the agriculture sector has been the least impacted. Let's introduce our panel of experts today. Mohandas, who's of course a co-founder of Infosys and now with the Manipal Global Education and a venture capitalist, is with us. We're also joined by Madhavan, Narayanan, veteran business and financial journalist, and also joining us from the Azim Premji University is expert Professor Zico Dasgupta. Welcome to all three of our guests. Mohandas, let me start by asking you whether the experience that you every day go through as someone who invests money, who's associated with private education, who has been one of our topmost industrialists, reconciles with what the economic survey is telling us, which is basically that life is back to where it was before COVID hit us. Do you feel that in your day-to-day experience as a business leader?
Well, Barkha, the macro level, GDP will grow from 197 lakh crores to 232 lakh crores. That is about 35 lakh crores, $466 billion, which is the highest ever in our history. Tax collection will be up from 22 lakh crores in the budget to an estimated 26 lakh crores. We have made an estimate, and it is 40% up till November. All sectors of the economy, barring services, are doing well. Even though corporate profitability has gone higher and higher for the last 5 quarters, tax collections have gone up. There is still some pain in the informal sector in the services area, which is clearly seen. The services growth is lagging what was there in 2022. Unemployment remains higher, not in an acceptable range. There is pain amongst people, but today we are better off than we were 6 months ago. And I think in the March quarter, we'll be much, much better off. And the government spending is increasing on infrastructure, which is creating efficiency. GST tax collection, 1.3 lakh crores. So I think it's a mixed bag. On the fiscal front, on the economic front, things look much, much better. There's great optimism for home, which could reach, let's say, $5 trillion by 2026 if the rupee dollar remains at 75. But, on the social sector, reaching out to the last mile, we have done a lot in the last 7 years, but we are much more. And, this pandemic has hit us back. The school education has taken a backseat for the last 2 years. So many crores of children have lost 2 years of learning. I think it's going to be a major issue in future. College education is lagging a little bit. It will catch up because people are much more mature. So I think it's a mixed bag. The economy looks like doing well. Tax collections are well. Growth is coming back. But the distribution of the growth in terms of private consumption is still low. Government consumption has gone up. So it's a mixed bag. So we have to reorient, hopefully, the budget to tackle the areas of stress. How do you take care of all of people who have suffered in the pandemic, especially the bottom of the pyramid? And there's been great pain. Even the middle class, many people lost their jobs, they lost their income, they spent a lot of money on medical expenditure. They're still not recovered. But we are much better today than 6 months ago.
Okay, but let me remind our audience of the kind of images, Mr. Mohandas that we saw coming out of Bihar, the desperation for a sarkari job, right? You see these images come out of rural India, and you have seen the protests that have taken place. There are those images where just that sort of future being linked to a government job. There's a kind of desperation that you see among young people. Now, the survey argues that unemployment rates are back to, at least urban unemployment rates are back to where they were pre-pandemic. Is this your sense of the industry, Mohan?
No, I think unemployment rate is much higher than what they calculate, because the data from CMI is based on a survey, but I think unemployment rate is in excess of 10%. It has been in excess of 10% for the last 30 years, and today maybe slightly worse. Barkha, if you look at India, our per capita income is 1,49,000. Karnataka is 2,50,000. Bihar is 49,000. UP is 79,000. Bihar is the poorest state in India. Their education accomplishment are abysmal. The gross enrollment rate in university is 13%. So I think it's abysmal. Bihar is really a basket case. I do hope in the budget we'll spend much, much more. So Barkha, we need to understand India is very diverse. There's nothing like one India which is an average. From 49,000 rupees per year per capita income to 2,50,000 in Karnataka, it is a factor of 5 times, and it's only diverged more in the last 20 years, and it's going to diverge more than the next 10 years. I don't know what to do with Bihar. West Bengal should also be careful. You see, UP is doing fairly well in the last 3-4 years. Rajasthan has done well. MP has done well. But Bihar is so bad, it is pathetic. Today, Barkha, the jobs are in South India. The jobs are in South India. The people coming out in the workforce are in North India. And men are migrating to South India to work. Women are not migrating. So women are going to college in a larger way in North India, and they're staying at home. So we have a very diverse kind of economic growth, and we really need to get our fingers in that each state has to chart its own growth, and states like Bihar need much, much more money and investment from the government of India than done earlier. So the pain is not the same all over.
And I think the important point that you make is that the unemployment rates, as given in the survey, do not actually reflect what's actually happening on the ground. And the other very serious thing that's happening that needs a show of its own is actually the declining female labor force participation, made much worse by this pandemic. But that's perhaps a separate deep dive. Madhavan, where do we reconcile the optimism of the economic survey with other surveys, whether it is data that comes out from universities like Azim, Premji, the Oxfam Inequality Report, the CMIE? The Oxfam Inequality Report, for instance, argues that 84% of Indian households have reflected a decline in income. Now, where do we take this number and reconcile it with the general optimism of the economic survey that says we're at least back to life as we knew it before COVID?
Barkha, first of all, let me congratulate my friend Mohandas Pai, because he has presented such an amazingly comprehensive and accurate picture that any accusation of his being close and proximate to the government in this case is certainly not valid. And of course, you stole, but between the two of you, you've stolen a bit of my thunder on what I wanted to say. So let me begin by mentioning that the Oxfam report mentions that 142 billionaires that India has have their incomes increased by 30 lakh crores, which is about 20% of India's GDP, just during the pandemic period. And the Sensex has been booming. And the other CMI report is, which of course Mohandas Pai went on to even discount, instead of, he says the unemployment is more than what it is, in which case it's important to understand that the CMI talked about 53 million people were looking actively for jobs in December. And it's much more. And if you look at it in terms of number of families, people per family, that could be 3-4 times that amount, which is like, I often say, it's like equal to 7 Australias looking for jobs, suffering because of this. So this is what economists have been talking as a K-shaped recovery, as opposed to a V-shaped recovery postulated by the departing Chief Economic Advisor, Krishnamurti Subramaniam. So we have to understand what V means. V is good for stock markets. K is good for bad for politics. It's bad for social morality. It's bad for management of.
But it's not. It's not really reflected in the numbers of the survey, Madhavan.
Exactly. So I often use, like the Sherlock Holmes metaphor, the dog that did not bark. And it says, if the dog doesn't, why is it that all along there was no politics around it? But the Bihar protests over railway recruitment shows that we have begun to see the political impact of unemployment, over which people like Mahesh Vyas of Center for Monitoring Indian Economy has been cribbing all along. And of course, Congress party does that all the time. But important to note that last month, two things happened. Haryana effected a new law mandating that 75% of the jobs earning below 30,000 per month must go to locals. And even the Chief Minister Khattar even threatened or hinted at action against the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Shooting the messengers
Yeah.
is a very popular pastime now in India. So if you put all these together, you know that this government, to draw a cricketing analogy, if I were to give the benefit of the doubt to the economic survey today, it's like having lost 3 wickets at 150. This is the best case scenario. 2 quick wickets and you're down on a one-day match. And let me mention who those 2 wickets are. Mr. Mohandas Pai mentioned it in passing. If the pandemic extends, we are in trouble. The other
Yeah.
is oil prices, which is it's been surging this month, and BJP's pet theme has always been inflation when it was sitting in the opposition. Inflation data is at 5.6%, which is uh, already close to the RBI top end data. And
Yeah.
also, we are talking about the fact that inflation as felt by people is not the economist's idea of an inflation, where it's merely a statistic. Uh, Ordinary people don't care about things like base effect, which economists talk about. So they'll talk about onion prices, they'll talk about jobs, they'll talk about household budgets. So
Yeah.
all this means the government is on thin ice. That's the bottom line. And let me also finish by saying that even among orthodox market-leaning economists who bet on the stock markets, I just was watching Barclays Bank and Nomura have both estimated the next year's GDP about half a percentage point below what the government has been talking about. And we will see in the budget tomorrow what kind of spending they are
Well,
going to do.
to be fair, the RBI had a much lower projection. So where the survey projects the GDP is higher than the RBI's and slightly lower than the IMF. And as you said, there are other ranking agencies that actually
I want to just mention
are
one
lower.
thing.
Can you
Just
just hold it? Can I just get Zico to come in and then we can go around the panel again? Professor Zico Dasgupta, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think three things. First of all, of course, the GDP has more or less recovered after 2 years. But what is noteworthy is that the consumption expenditure hasn't. The private final consumption expenditure is way below, even in absolute terms, way below the pre-pandemic level. And that's alarming because hasn't happened even during the global financial crisis. If you remember that during the global financial crisis, the consumption GDP ratio actually increased in India because the consumption didn't decline as much as the GDP had declined. So the fact that consumption GDP ratio has declined, consumption expenditure is lower than the pre-pandemic level, tells us immense about the state of the economy and the fact that there is a certain section of the population or the economy who has really taken the brunt. Secondly, of course, there is a huge question of inequality and unemployment. The recovery that we have witnessed has not been associated with similar recovery either in employment, or it has been also associated with sharp rise in the inequality, which needs to be addressed. And last but not the least, I think the course of recovery needs to be thought as well. Because at this point of time, there is, of course, some amount of government expenditures which led to the recovery. But what has also been one of the reasons is the external demand. Entire set of countries which are implementing their fiscal stimulus right now is pushing up the entire global demand, and that is helping in India's exports as well. But if it is the
Okay.
case that at some point of time that they withdraw their stimulus, as India would be at some point of time and many other countries could be, it needs to be seen what happens to this external demand in the first case. And last
That
but not the least, just a last point, a pinch of salt. I'll take the economic survey estimate of the GDP growth rate with some pinch of salt, because in the recent period, in all the years, economic surveys estimates has been higher than the actual value. Think about the 2021 figure where their estimates was greater than the actuals that we see right now, or even say in the year 2018-19 or 2019-20. I'm just letting aside the pandemic year itself.
Sure.
So I'll take that figure with a pinch of salt. Yeah.
Okay, before I go back to Mohandas Pai, Madhavan, you wanted to make a point, but I'll just pintail a question of my own. I think Zico makes an important point about consumption, and to your point about inflation. The survey does have a warning about inflation. The survey itself is concerned about wholesale inflation and the increase in it, and also that consumption is being propelled by government spending, right? So at some point, that is going to, and there was no choice. I'm not faulting the government for increasing expenditure. In fact, there are economists who've argued that the government needed to spend even more than it has. Go ahead, Madhavan.
Yeah, I think I wanted to mention, Barkha, I want to take your show to the fact that we keep talking about GDP, inflation, jobs, and growth numbers. What we need to also do more often is measure inequality, which Zico mentioned, which is the Gini coefficient. Now, one of the more, India crawled up from 82 to 74. Like the Human Development Index, you have the Gini coefficient, which measures inequality. India's progress in reducing inequality has been very, very slow, although incomes have risen. And I
Yeah.
link the farmers' protest directly to that, because farmers' protest is not just about farm prices and the laws. It's also because they feel a sense of inequality, because as citizens, people feel the inequality. And the tax to GDP ratio, in spite of a current surge, now I link the current surge also to lower interest rates. So if it is raining money because of extraordinary policies by the Reserve Bank in view of the pandemic, or because the US economy has been loosening its purses through the Fed, then that tax revenue is more like a temporary phenomenon. So it's a catch 22 situation. Without growth, there is no tax, but without tax, there is no spending, and without spending, there is no growth. So unless you can break this vicious cycle with some very inspired reforms, I mean, we have to go beyond the current round of
Yeah.
disinvestment and all, but I don't see that really happening, because we are already sitting on inflation and the prospect of an interest rate hike. So it is, let me draw my cricketing analogy again. We need to play more strokes without losing wickets, and that's not going to be easy.
Okay, Mohandas
So
Pai,
we
if you
see,
want to come in, yeah, your cricketing analogy, I think I'll take to the other panelists, flagging the serious issues, right? Consumption remains a problem area. Consumption is being buoyed by the government spending more and more. That's going to have its own impact on deficit. And there are those who are now saying that if the economy is in fact as healthy as the survey says, then it's time for fiscal consolidation instead
Well,
of increased fiscal spending. Mohan.
Barkha, this year we'll have a fiscal deficit of 6.8 or less, hopefully less, because tax collection will be up by 4 lakh crores. In fact, Madhavan, just now they released the numbers for December. Study that and you'll find out why 4 lakh crores is a distinct possibility in increase. Second point, which I want to say, Barkha, our banking system has regained its health. So we don't have an NPA problem. We have adequate capital. So lending for capex to the private sector and other places will be higher this year and the next year. The third thing is the private sector has reduced enormous amount of debt. They're making profit. They're starting the capex cycle. So for the economy to grow, we need consumption. We need capex. Now capex is going to go up this year. That will be good. And for the economy to grow in the last quarter, that is the December quarter, when we get the numbers, I think numbers for the GDP, we'll find that the consumption has nearly gone up. So we are coming up. Now that Oxfam numbers and all numbers are 6 months old. You would take the bottom of the pandemic and compare to the top when it's there, you're going to find something. And somebody said, we never had a problem in the global financial crisis. But the global financial crisis didn't impact India. India's consumption was not hurt. Our banking system did not go down. Now in the pandemic, India was shut down for 6 months. When you shut down everything for 6 months, you have a problem. So these are not comparable. See, my view is very simple, Barkha. We will have an increased capex, government and private sector next year. We'll have increased corporate profitability because they're reconfigured, they lower the cost, they're much more efficient. We'll have lower supply chain costs because of all the infrastructure investment that are coming. Tax collection, I think, will go up next year by another 4 lakh crores. The key challenge for us today, and fiscal cuts won't take place, fiscal deficit may come to 6.3 lakh crores because 0.5% is equal to 1 lakh crore a year. That will happen. And then the government is doing it, everybody's talking about it. The biggest problem for me, Barkha, what to do with the states? Let me give a data. This year, 70% of all government spending is done by the states, 30% by the center. In an ordinary year, it was 26% by center, 74% by the states. So the states have to get their act together. What do you do with Bihar? What do you do with Uttar Pradesh? What do you do with West Bengal? What do you do with Rajasthan? If they don't rise their level up, how can India grow? The South is growing very well. They're quite rich. What do you do about the middle India? And there you lead governance. See, the problem is, it's not an India problem, it's a state-specific problem because, Barkha, each of the states are bigger than the countries of Europe. So we've got to be very careful when we talk about an India problem.
Okay, let me get Zico in on this. Zico, I think the argument Mohandas Pai is making is that you can't aggregate the inequality figures and extrapolate them to represent the health of the country. That this is sometimes regional, sometimes geography specific. But we do know that, of course, the wealth of billionaires did increase in the pandemic. We know that as a fact, irrespective of which state they came from. Zico, go ahead.
No, I think it has always been the case in all kinds of inequality that it will vary from region to region. So that's not specific to this pandemic. It always be the case. The point remains that even during the pandemic, certain corporates has increased their profitability despite reduction in sales. So profitability has gone up, employability has gone down, and which has been associated with changes in inequality. That's point one. And that is independent of to what extent this is happening in different regions. Of course, that would vary from region to region, but that is a common story. And second, the point is precisely this, that this crisis is different from the one that we had witnessed in global financial crisis. And that's precisely the point, that the consumption expenditure is lower. But the manner in which the government is undertaking its policies, it seems that there is some commonalities in the policy response that we witnessed during 2009-10 and 10-11 as to the policy response that we're witnessing right now. So for example, exclusive emphasis on capital expenditures without similar emphasis on employment guarantee schemes or income transfers. Expenditures that can sustain a wide range of or wide sections of the community who have lost their jobs to compensate their income. So that kind of expenditures had been missing in the last budget. So the question is whether we would be able to address these lacunas in the present budget or not.
Okay, fair enough. Let me end by asking all three of you what you would like to see in the budget tomorrow, right? That is what is critical now. I'll start with you, Zico, and we'll take last comments. What is the one policy prescription that you would hope for? Because you framed your comments within the framework of policy responses. What's the one thing you're hopeful or would want to see in the budget?
Well, I'm not hopeful, but I do want to see higher expenditures incurred for employment guarantee schemes, expenditures for additional income transfers, and of course there would be some requirement of capital expenditures as well to boost growth. But second related point, I think this is not only true for tomorrow's budget but all budget. The tax policies in India are constructed independent of our expenditure needs. You have a certain arbitrarily chosen corporate tax ratios or income tax ratios, and then it is the expenditures which has to adjust to meet the fiscal rules. I think that we need to rethink in this crisis, and we need to think tax policies in this regard.
And great point, I think. Madhavan, let me bring you in on this. Let's also remember that there is an election backdrop to this budget. There's always an election in India. So like last year, there is an election backdrop, but this is an Uttar Pradesh election among other very critical elections. And you could expect a certain degree of welfareism for the sake of politics, if not for its own sake. Madhavan, what would you like to see in the budget?
I'm afraid that I would like to see it, but please understand that health and education are basically state subjects. But we are fighting the UP elections on expressways and airports. So there is a huge paradox out there, apart from Ayodhya temple and all. So let me rephrase Mohandas Pai, who talked about how Tamil Nadu and the South are going ahead and how people are migrating from the North to South. So maybe we don't need a Gujarat model. We need more of a Tamil Nadu or Karnataka model. And anything that takes more of that kind of an emphasis on education and health, what I would like to see and will probably happen is a fine balance between expenditure to boost consumption and employment on the one hand, and expenditure to boost capital, construction like infrastructure. But the balance between the two is the thing I would like to watch out for, because this government may be doing too much of muscular spending and too little of welfare spending. And that is where both politically and socially we may be on a thin wicket. But I'll be glad to be proved wrong by Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman tomorrow.
All right, Mohandas, my last word to you. You've already said states concern you, but what would you see reflected in the union budget? The union budget can't mandate the states on what policies to frame.
Barkha, little bit of data, then I'll give my opinion. the total development expenditure in India is something like about 40 lakh crores. It's a lot of money. The problem in India is how do you distribute it, make it work, right? That's the last mile problem is still there. Just now on the TV screen, we had the revenues up to December. Up to December, we got 17.6 lakh crores revenue as against 11.2 lakh crores till December last year. This is enormous. This is enormous, right? And fiscal deficit in December is only 50%. This is enormous. I think there's very good news coming. But the budget will have a lot of scope for innovation and transformation. In fact, I wrote an article. I hope to see a transformation. Barkha, there's one thing I want the finance minister to do. To have a large program to create more jobs in labor-intensive industries in the bottom 300 districts of India. The bottom 300 districts of India are very poor. We need to incentivize the creation of labor-intensive industries who, for every crore of capital, could give 10 jobs or 15 jobs, not refineries, not steel plants. And we got to give incentive like 2,000, 3,000 rupees a month for 3 years to every job created. And we must aim to create 3 to 5 crore jobs in those districts in the next 5 to 7 years. And if you take the bottom 300 districts and focus on that, you maybe spend 1 lakh crore a year. 1 lakh crore a year is available. Money is available in this country. Now we have to focus. And I think that's the most important thing I want, because to me, all the young people should have hopes of jobs. They must get access to jobs. They must not be disappointed. We must not spoil the future of our young people. They must be optimistic. So jobs, jobs, and jobs. And for that, not capital-intensive grants, but labor-intensive industries where China has done extremely well. That is what we got to incentivize and put them in the bottom 300 poor districts to tackle the problem like the aspirational district problem directly. That is my hope and prayer to the Finance Minister and Prime Minister.
I think we've seen some great suggestions on this panel, and Bihar has been a reminder of what happens when the hope for that job goes, the despair and the violence, the social disorder it can in fact create. So that is really where we should be focusing on the bottom 300 districts, which means targeted spending, not just capital expenditure. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. Thank you, Mohandas Pai, Madhavan, Narayanan, Zico, Dasgupta, and we will of course have you all back as more details emerge in the union budget to be tabled in Parliament tomorrow. Don't forget to look out for the special programming on the Mojo Story. See you then. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.